In this lecture, we will take a look at how we can compare strings. So if we're going to use if statements to do comparisons, we've already talked about how we can compare integers, doubles, floats, characters, but what about strings? We talked a little bit about comparing strings, but let's talk a little bit more about it in depth since comparing strings is a big deal. So how does this work? The idea is that we compare the strings one character at a time, and we keep doing this until one of three possible conditions are met. So we either get a mismatch between the two characters, we find that we get to the last characters that we have compared, and we find out that we go all the way to the end and the last characters are equal, or we exhaust one of the strings. So one string clearly has more characters than the other. Let's take a look at a couple examples to illustrate this. So let's say I compare the strings air and big. Air is going to be less than big because I'm going to compare the first two characters. I'm going to compare the capital A and capital B. And since A is less than B, then that means the string air is less than the string big. Now let's take a look at another example. Let's say I want to compare air with an. In this case, I'm going to compare the A's, and they're the exact same. And then, so I'm going to compare the next letter in each string. So I'm going to compare the I and the N. And since I is less than N, that means the string air is less than the string an. Now, if we compare two strings and they have different lengths, and what I mean by that is they keep having the same characters, but eventually one of them runs out of characters, then the shorter string is evaluated as less than the larger string. So let's take a look at an example. So let's say I want to compare Bill and Billy. Up to the fourth character, they have the exact same characters. But since Billy has one extra character, we're going to say that Bill is less than Billy. And if we do the same type of comparison for Sun and Sunny, the first three characters, they have the exact same thing. They have the exact same prefix, Sun. But since Sunny has more characters, then Sun is evaluated as being less than Sunny. So how do we do these comparisons? Well, if you remember, the string class uses the compare to method in order to compare strings. And the format of that, using the example where str1 and str2 are string variables, we would say str1.compare to str2. So this compares the strings str1 and str2. So this method is going to give us one of three possible outcomes. So if this returns a value that is less than 0, then str1 is less than str2. If the result is greater than 0, then str1 is greater than str2. And if the result is equal to 0, then that means str1 and str2 are the same strings. So we can use this compare to method inside the condition of our if statement. So let's take a look at some examples of using the compare to method. So for these examples, we're going to use three different strings. str1 is going to have the string hello, str2 is going to have the string hi, and str3 is going to have the string air. So let's see what happens if we can do str1.compare to str2. This is going to return a negative value. We won't worry about exactly what that negative value is just yet, but we know that str1 is going to be less than str2 because we compare the two h's, they're the same, and then we compare the e and the I. So since e comes before I, then str1 is going to be less than str2. Now let's try comparing str1 with the string hen. So yes, we can pass just string literals or string constants in our methods as well. This is also going to return a negative value because the h's are going to be the same, the e's are going to be the same. So now we're going to compare the third characters. So since L comes before N, that means L is less than N. So that means hello is going to be less than hen. So string 1 is going to be less than string 2. Now let's compare string 2 with string 3. So this is going to return a positive value because H comes after A. So that means that H is greater than A. So string 2 is greater than string 3. Now let's try comparing string 1 with hello. The difference though is that the H in our past string is lowercase and string 1 contains a capital H. So to show that capital H is actually less than lower h, we have to look at the collating sequence. So capital H corresponds to the number 72, and lowercase h corresponds to the letter, or I should say the collating sequence 104. So since capital H is less than lowercase h, string 1 is going to be less than the string hello with the h as a lowercase letter. Now let's try comparing string 2 with hi. So this is going to return 0 because both strings have the exact same characters and they have the exact same lengths. We're going to compare the two h's and find that they're the same. We're going to compare the two i's and find that they're the same. And then we're going to find that there are no more characters in either string, so they're going to be the same. Now what about this one, where we compare string 1 with hello, but hello in this case has an extra space. This is going to return a negative number because string 1 has 5 characters and hello with a space has 6 characters. So up to the 5th character, they're the exact same. But since our second string has an additional character, even though it's a space, it's going to come after hello. So string 1 will be less than hello with a space. Now I said a minute ago, let's not worry about what the actual values are that were returned, but let's actually take a look at it and see what is really going on, because if it's going to return some negative value, for instance, why does it return one negative value over another? So let me just show you what results we would get, and I'm going to explain why this actually happens. So using the same examples before, if we compare string 1 to string 2, we would get a negative 4. If we compare string 1 with hen, we would get a negative 2. If we compare string 2 with string 3, we would get a positive 7. If we compare string 1 with hello, we would get negative 32. If we compare string 2 with hi, we get a 0. And if we compare string 1 with hello with a space, we get a negative 1. So why does this happen? Well, these numbers are actually the differences of the collating sequence of the first unmatched characters in the string. So what that means is when I'm comparing one character at a time, the way the comparison is happening is we're checking the difference in the collating sequences. If they're 0, that means they're the same, so we'll move on to the next character. If they're different, then that value is what gets returned, and that tells us whether the strings are less than or greater than each other. Now, for our purposes, all we care about is whether the difference is positive, negative, or 0. So we're not too worried about what those actual values are, or how far away they are from each other. So how do these string comparisons apply to our programs? Well, we can use if statements to compare the strings, and based on the results, we can decide what we want to do. So here is an example. So we have a couple strings here, status 1 and status 2. So we're going to ask the user to enter the tax status. So they're going to type in some number, whether they're single or married. So we have our first comparison right here. So we check to see if the user typed in the word married. And if so that means string status1.compared to married would equal 0. Then we're going to ask the user whether the filing is joint or separately. So we would ask the user to do that. They would type in something, and then we would do another comparison right here to actually see what they did. So if they typed in the word joint, so it would be a complete match, then we would say their exemption is 12,000. And if that's not true, then we're going to check to see if the user typed in the word separately. And if that's true, then the exemption would be set to 6,000. Recall that if we want to check if two strings are equal to each other, we're not limited to just the compare to method. We can also use the equals method for checking for equality. Now remember, this is a Boolean method, so it's going to return true if the two strings are equal and false otherwise. So using our earlier example, if I say str1.equals hello, this is going to evaluate the true because they're both the same.